I had some people asking if I could talk more about the rig that I use when I record guitar for videos. And the answer to that question is really simple. It's just GarageBand and a Marshall type amp stem that comes stock, and I use a Scarlett 4i4 for my USB interface. That's the whole setup. There's nothing else to it. But I could talk more about my live setup. I think that's a little bit more interesting, and it's been sort of ever evolving. Not everything you're about to see is like necessary to own as a post-hardcore guitarist. In fact, I would recommend starting with very little and kind of working on honing your craft, and across years and years, maybe you can accrue like a larger collection of stuff. But you should feel no pressure to kind of like go out and buy all of this right away if you want to become a post-hardcore guitarist. These are just things that I've come to own over time, and I've been using them currently. I've developed kind of a maximalist approach over the past year or so. That's kind of new to me, and I can go into more detail about it too. I've talked about my pedal board before. I don't think I've talked about my amp at all, however, and I don't think I've gone into very much detail about how I feel about the guitar now that I've been playing it for about 6 or 7 months, so let's get into it. So I bought this Telecaster to replace the Dan Electro that I started the channel with some months ago, and the Dan Electro that I'd had since I was a teenager, if you believe it or not. And it was in pretty bad shape. The frets were like almost completely worn down and probably beyond repair. And the action was really bad because the neck had just gotten really bent from years and years of really heavy gauge strings. And the bridge was bent. There was a lot of problems. I think the luthier probably could have fixed a lot of it, but I thought that spending several $100s fixing a guitar that was probably only worth a few hundred to maybe 500 to begin with, it probably wouldn't be a good use of funds. So I went out and I just got this guitar instead. First Fender I've ever owned. I am definitely in love with it. I will say, you definitely don't have to buy a Fender, especially if you know a thing or two about setting up a guitar and basic luthier work. You can probably just buy a Squier and get essentially a Fender quality guitar after a little bit of work. Fender is definitely just a label that you see on the headstock and not a whole lot more. A lot of professional guitarists just use lower shelf guitars and they do great. So by no means do you have to buy a Fender. I think this one sounds pretty good. It definitely needed to get set up when I bought it. It also needs to be tuned up really badly right now because the winter just happened and all sorts of temperature fluctuations were taking place. But I've had a lot of fun playing it. I was worried about the neck shape when I bought it because I'm used to playing a much thinner neck. Got used to it really easily. I love the way it sounds. The tone is immaculate. I think I first played a Fender Telecaster probably when I was like 18 or 19 and just knew that that was one of my favorite guitar tones right off the bat. It's single coil, so it's very trebly. This whole rig is very trebly, I think you'll find. That's not for everybody, but it's a sound that I really like. If you can't tell by the channel name, I'm very inspired by Minutemen. They had really trebly guitar tone. Maybe that plays a role in it, I'm not sure. I guess I can play a little bit. I got both my gain stages turned up on my board right now. So yeah, when I'm playing, I pretty much exclusively use the bridge pickup. Quite like it. I also have the tone knob rolled all the way to treble. I mean, as long as you're keeping your action low and kind of following those guidelines, I think you're going to get pretty good tone out of a Telecaster. You also want to make sure your pickups are real close to your strings, you know, as close as you can get them. That's just general guitar advice. This is all kind of just general guitar advice. But yeah, highly recommend the Fender Telecaster. I played Ibanez's when I was a teenager, and then I graduated to playing Dan Electros for a long time, just mostly because of style. And yeah, this is the first guitar I think I've owned that felt like more of a real guitar, you know. So let's move on to the board. Okay, so pedal time. Let's start with my TU3. It's a Boss chromatic tuner. It works great, you know. I've had it for a really, really long time. It's a bomb-proof tuner. They're on the more expensive side, but there's a reason why they're so popular, and I recommend them. This one just keeps going and going and going, and it doesn't stop, and it does what it's supposed to. It gets me in tune. It also cuts the sound, you know, has a bunch of different functions that I mostly don't use, but I've found that this classic chromatic tuner where the line kind of moves around and sits in the center when you got the right note works perfect for me. That's really all there is to it. I've never owned another tuning pedal. I bought that one when I was maybe like 20 or 21, and I've had it ever since. Next, we've got another pedal that I've had for a really, really long time, which is a pedal that's achieved definitely like cult status in the past few years or so, particularly because JHS put out a video where they compared the circuit to the Klon Centaur, and everybody freaked out and went out and bought one. So now you really can't get them anymore. It's the Bad Monkey by DigiTech. It's a solid overdrive. I bought this one in 2006 for like $30 or $40 from Daddy's Junkie Music in Connecticut, and I've had it ever since. And it's continued to work. It's needed some maintenance over the years, mostly just blowing dust out of the cavity. That's one thing they won't tell you about this pedal, is that there's a big hole here that leads all the way into like the circuitry and stuff. So sometimes it'll get real dusty and you gotta kind of like clean it out and whatnot. Be wary of that. The tone I kind of go in and out of liking. I put it back on my board in order to add mostly compression. It's not adding very much in the way of grit right now, and I think that's kind of the best use for it, really, because I don't love the grit tone. I needed more compression, and that's why I put it back on the board, even though I didn't really like the way that it was dirtying up the sound. So it really doesn't change much. It's really only making my sound a little bit fatter. I was finding when I was getting to like lead sections, my sound was getting kind of like lost in the mix a lot of times. So when we reamped my guitars recently for the record, the Valencia record, I put this back on the board and I've had it on ever since. Next, you might have noticed that I put this EHX Wailer Wah higher up in my signal chain than it used to be. And the reason for that, I like that it has a wider EQ sweep when you put it all the way downstream in your pedal board. But what I noticed upon watching footage of a lot of other heavy guitarists who use wah pedals is that they tend to put them upstream of some grit. And after experimenting, I've come to the conclusion that it is actually a little bit better upstream. The narrowness of the EQ range is actually better because your guitar doesn't get lost as much. And also you retain the same amount of distortion for the most part the whole way through your sound. That makes sort of a difference in terms of consistency as well. So it's now found a home at the number 2 spot on my board. And yeah, with these two things turned on, it sounds pretty wild. The Rat is a distortion pedal I've had for a while. I really like it. It's one of the oldest distortion pedals on the market. The circuit is great. It's very heavy, and you can dial in it exactly where you want it in terms of filtering and distortion and volume. I like my settings where they are currently pretty well. It's just a matter of dialing it in, you know, where you want it to be. So yeah. Yeah, solid distortion pedal on the cheaper side too. Highly recommend. Let's add some chorus in there too. So this is my chorus ensemble pedal by Boss as well. It adds modulation. It can do it in stereo. It has filtering, and the range and depth go pretty wide. I have mine set a little bit past the middle right now, and then I have the effects level turned up pretty high. I might actually turn that down a little bit. Yeah, I have a little bit of filtering going on as well on the low end, because I mostly use this in higher end stuff. You know, chords can get a little muddier, especially down low sometimes, but if you pick it out, it sounds pretty good. And yeah, one of the cool things about this pedal is that if you get an A and B out on it, you can send them to separate amps. It gives you a stereo effect while it's on, which makes it sound like you're playing 2 guitars, which is pretty cool. I used to play in a 2-piece band that had just a guitar and drums, and that's kind of why I wanted to buy this, but by the time I got around to buying it, it was years later and I wasn't playing in that band anymore. So now I just have the pedal. I think there's a couple others by Boss that are also very good. I'm not really sure which is the best. Personally, I think this is the only one I've owned. Increasingly, sort of like a shoegazy sound is getting more and more popular in like the Screamo post-hardcore space, and having a chorus pedal on your board is is definitely going to help with that sound. As is wah. You know, I think to go back to this for a second, like wah also definitely brings a sort of a nu metal-y, funk metal-y sort of sound to the situation. All right, moving on, we got my DD7 here. I mostly just use it to make noise. It's set up so that it instantly starts self-oscillating. And I like it to be set to self-oscillate like that, but I've also found that it's kind of cool. You can set it a little bit lower like this, and then do like a tap delay thing. I think maybe if I turn this down, it'll work properly. I'm trying to get it right here. It's definitely like a more expensive delay pedal, but it's got so many functionalities and it's been copied many times. Highly recommend DD7. I think the DD8 is the one now that's in vogue, or the new one. If you've got the money, they're a lot of fun. So I just put this super shifter on my board because I don't have a whammy bar on my guitar and I wanted to do some downward bends, so it just does... has a lot of other functionalities too. One of my other favorites is the harmonizer, I think. There's a detune function as well, but let's run through the harmonist real quick. I think I gotta dial this back. This is pretty cool. Does not work well with chords. Let's see what the detune does. Yeah, and you can play with the blend level as well. This is a really cool pedal. Next, we got the TC Electronic Flashback. This is the first delay pedal I ever bought, and it's getting pretty old these days, but I left it on the board for a little bit of spaciness, and it offers that. I usually pair it with the Mooer R7, which we'll go over in a second. It has a lot of different settings, but a lot of them sound kind of the same, and it also has a loop functionality, as does the DD8, DD7, excuse me. I mostly leave it set on lo-fi, which is one of the settings that I think is a little bit cooler and like spacier sounding, I suppose. And yeah, the settings are about here, kind of like higher up feedback, a little bit slappy in the delay, FX level maybe at 2/3. You know, it sounds like this. And you'll notice that you can also set the notes so that they either are eighth note, quarter note, or dotted eighth note, I believe. That gives you a slightly different sound. So yeah, a lot of functionality there. It doesn't self-oscillate, which is why I went out and got the DD7, but it sounds really cool and I've left it on my board for that reason. 2 delay pedals is kind of a good idea, I think. One that does like conventional delay and then one that does like lots of delay. All right, and then we have the Mooer R7 last right here. It's giving me a little bit of a heavier reverb because I have some reverb coming from the amp. So if I want to do more ambient sections, I usually put these together so it gets even spacier. I forgot that the detune was set up. I thought my whammy was still in. Let's fix that real quick before I forget again. And one thing that I really like about the R7 but don't like as much about the TC Electronic Flashback is when you turn it off, the sound keeps tailing. It immediately cuts off when you turn off the TC Electronic Flashback, and that's not as cool in my opinion. All right, let's move on to the amp. All right, real quick, this is a Roland Blues Cube Stage. It's a solid state amp, but it was designed to be kind of like a tube mimic because it was made at a time when people were, I think, still kind of soft on solid states. I think it has great tone. I mostly use the clean channel. I don't really love the way that the dirty sounds on it. You can blend them together if you want. It's just okay in my opinion. This tone button engages a little like cartridge that can be added to the amp that gives it kind of like a special, I don't know, warmer, more analog-y, slightly fuzzy sound maybe. You know, I turn the volume up a little bit and then I set the master wherever is appropriate for the room. This has adjustable power, which is kind of nice too, so if you're playing in a quieter setting, you can leave it turned down low. Because my setting is so trebly, I typically have the treble rolled back compared to the bass in the mid-range. I've been turning up the mid-range steadily over time. My sound just needed more and more mid to cut through, I think. You'll notice I have some reverb cranked here at the amp as well, just a little bit to give myself a little bit more spaciness, you know, can help smooth out the sound a little bit. So you can pick up a Blues Cube Stage new for maybe like $800 or $900. I got this one used. I would definitely recommend trying to find one used if possible. Roland amps can be really expensive. I got this because I couldn't find a jazz chorus in budget range, which is what I really wanted, and also because I wasn't really going to use the chorus on it, I don't think. As I pointed out, I have 2 gain stages on my board. I think that's a good idea. It gives you multiple levels of dirt. It also can kind of add more compression like I was explaining earlier. Other than that, like what you want to do with your sound is kind of up to you. I personally like the single coil trebly sound. A lot of people prefer humbuckers and a more mid-rangey, bass-rangey sound for guitar. There's a reason why Gibsons are really popular guitars in the Screamo post-hardcore space for sure. You know, try a bunch of stuff out. Don't buy something without playing it first and seeing how you like it. And, you know, buy stuff that sounds good to you, I guess. I hope this was informative and you learned a little bit about how my rig works. And yeah, enjoy setting your own up sometime and getting into playing guitar more. Have fun with it.